Hello and welcome to Watch Me. Today we're gonna take a quick look at the Breguet Transatlantique Flyback Type 21. In my opinion, at least, this is one of the chronograph watches to have in your collection, and we'll take a quick overview on why that is. So let's start with the kind of quick history on the Breguet Type 21. So this is a vintage inspired chronograph, and Breguet has been making chronographs dating back to the 1950s or so, and I believe they did supply the French with chronograph watches and pilots at that time. And the design for the Type 20 was born, and that is still there in their lineup, and it is one of their classic chronograph designs with the large numerals, very legible tool watch out there, in the luxury watch market. And what they did over a period of time, they have evolved the Type 20 collection and added Type 21 and Type 22, and they've kind of modernized the watch a little bit. The Type 20 was a little smaller, didn't have the coin bezels, had smaller numerals, and had a closed case back, and they kind of brought this watch up into the modern era. So let's start with the specifications of the watch. This is a 42mm case. However, it does have the coin edge bezel, which will essentially add a couple to the sides, as you can see, but overall it wears like a 43 or so, is what I would say. The lug to lug's actually very controlled at around 48, and the lugs are tapered down quite dramatically towards the end, and they're fairly short, and this really helps with wearability. I for one did not expect to be able to wear this watch at all, but it wears very nicely on my wrist. And the thickness, it's a little on the thicker side. It's a 15 thick watch, but the crystal is domed quite a bit, and the bezel itself is sloped quite dramatically. So visually, when you wear it, yes, it does have I'm a big watch look. However, it kind of eats up the thickness a little bit because of the way the bezel is sloped, and the crystal almost has a glass dome look to it, and you don't notice it as much, in my opinion, as you would think, and it wears pretty well. And the lug width is 22mm. As you would have noticed, I have already swapped the strap on this guy because I personally felt a stronger stitch pattern would go nicer on this watch, and I like this combination quite a bit. So let's take a closer look at the dial. So the dial here is, in my opinion, one of the most well thought out tool watch dials. So to begin with, it's incredibly legible. The markers are nice and large, and they are loomed, and I like that they're not cut off. They're not chopped off in any way, and they have actually pushed the size of the markers up a little bit compared to the previous gen, so they balance out the dial a little better than before. Secondly, I like that the three subdials kind of have different hands. It's a very subtle, elegant touch, which I kind of dig. The other elegant touch that I like is the difference between the finishing on the running seconds for the chronograph and the minute totalizer. The hand surface itself is finished differently, so as you can see, the running seconds for the chronograph is fully polished, high polish, whereas the minute hand for the chronograph has a silver kind of finish to it with the tip being the same luminescent color as the numerals and the hands. In the 24-hour sub-register on the right, the darker times of the day, I guess 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. has a darker texture to it by using those stripes to indicate it is PM versus AM. One thing to note here is this is a flyback chronograph. And what is a flyback chronograph? So a flyback chronograph is essentially a chronograph complication that you can continue to run by resetting it while it runs. So you can see the chronograph is currently running, and a flyback mechanism basically would immediately start the next cycle without having to stop and reset. This to me is one of the most useful chronograph complications, simply because this is going to be very useful for any recurring event. So let's say you're doing laps. So for every lap, all you do is you don't have to stop and start, because if it's continuous laps, you will actually lose time by stopping and resetting. So instead, as you are watching the lap end, if you record the time that it has ended, you simply hit the reset button so that the next lap has started. It's actually practical in terms of day-to-day use. You don't time a singular event. If you have a recurring event, it is very practical. The second really practical feature on this watch is the central minute counter for the chronograph. Now most chronographs end up having a sub-dial for the minute counter, and what ends up happening with that is typically you do not have the actual minute markings. You end up having 35 or 10 and 20, and a lot of times you either have to look very closely to grab the exact minute, or you may have to even guess in some cases where the actual minute numbers are not indicated. That they have eliminated completely, where they have very clear markings from 60 onwards for every 5-minute interval, with each minute marked. Believe it or not, if you have used chronograph before, you will really appreciate how quickly at a glance you can tell what the exact second and minute is. And especially for a flyback where you're grabbing and recording a timed event as it is continuing, it's very nice to be able to quickly glance and know what the time was before you reset and move on to the next cycle. To completely reset and stop the chronograph, you will stop it with the top and you will reset it with the bottom. So very useful, very legible, very practical, really well thought out. In terms of the depth of the dial as well, these recessed subdials are done extremely well, and there are actually two levels to it. So if you notice, there is a slightly raised center to the dial, and the subdials actually cut through both the edge of it and the center, so you can see that the depth of the subdial is changing as it goes around, and that's a very cool effect that is more pronounced in person. So the bezel here is a bi-directional bezel. So the bezel action is quite nice. It's notchy, clicky, very precise, very firm. There is no play at all in the bezel. It's done really well. And the bezel finish is brushed with a very subtle kind of polished line on the top, and the coin edge bezel at the edge. However, it does tend to scratch. So as you can see in this, it's already picked up a couple of marks on the brushed side of the bezel. So it is going to show wear, unlike a ceramic bezel, which is not going to show you wear on the bezel. This watch will show wear and tear on the bezel. The other classic kind of Breguet design is the coin edge. This is one of their signature design elements. So it wraps around essentially the watch, and it looks absolutely incredible in person. It's very detailed, it's high polish, and combined with the polished lugs, it looks very beautiful. So let's touch upon the other unique factor of the Type 21, which is the see-through case back, and I'm really glad and let's just say this is one of the main features. I prefer the 21 over the 20 because the 20 has a closed case back and it's not finished to this degree. So they have upped the finishing of the movement just for the Type 21, and the rotor is a solid gold rotor with excellent finish on it, which just grabs light and has a three-dimensional look to it. And even the movement itself, you can see that there are so many different types of finishing. You know, typically you will end up seeing perlage and maybe stripes, but this, while they have been a bit conservative compared to their typical higher end Breguet style finishing, they still have gone to great lengths to make sure that every single piece here is finished. They've done a great job with the weight balance and overall design and aesthetic of the watch, and this retails for 13,900 US dollar. As a chronograph, this should be top of everybody's list compared to what's out there, and you have to see this in person and try it on to truly appreciate the level of detail and finish and finesse and how instantly recognizable and iconic this watch is. And it's not just about the dress watches in Breguet, and their pilot chronograph is just as important and just as iconic as the rest of their lineup. So that's my quick review for the Breguet Type 21 Flyback 3817. If you like the video, please like and subscribe, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer to the best of my knowledge. Thank you. Bye bye.